Welcome to the first episode of Learning with Leaders, a podcast by TIFAL Global Network from United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Our goal is to inspire you by sharing the stories and experiences of people who have achieved personal and professional success. So follow along with us as we learn about their journeys and the ideas that have brought them to where they are today. Thanks for joining us, and let's begin.
Nikhil Seth has been a remarkable example of leadership throughout his career. He began as a professor at the University of Delhi but quickly embarked on an international path, representing India at the UN's permanent mission, serving as a pivotal leader at the Rio+20 summit, and being one of the founding architects of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals are just a few of the key roles he's held. In 2015, he was appointed UN Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR.
So it's a true pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you, Mr. Nikhil Seth. What a good way to start our podcast, Learning with Leaders.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I understand that there are a lot of young listeners, and that's a special pleasure for me because I'm kind of winding down my career at the United Nations, and I do like the thought that I'll be able to share my work experience and life experience with so many young people. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So for those who may not be familiar with your outstanding career in the global development and sustainability, could you maybe do a brief introduction of yourself and also overview of your professional background?
I started my life in academics, actually, teaching courses in economics to undergraduate students in Delhi University. And then I migrated to the private sector. I worked for a confederation of Indian engineering industry. Then I worked for the Indian Railways. And then I joined the diplomatic service, stayed 13 years with the diplomatic service, and then joined the United Nations. So the bulk of my working life has been on multilateral issues, working with the United Nations as a delegate from 1990 to 93, and subsequently in various interesting positions in the United Nations. So for all my sins, sustainable development has been the issue which I have had to wrap my head around right since the time of the Rio summit in 1992. And through my career, sustainability and sustainable development has been the guiding force of my work.
Through all your career, you are recognized as one of the founders of the Agenda 2030. Which was your role in shaping this landmark global framework?
The true achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals was this democratization of ownership. And that's what has made it so durable. And that's why it's permeated societies. Almost everywhere in the world I go, Sustainable Development Goals are known and understood. My own role was to herd so many cats together. The UN General Assembly, as you know, has 193 member states. They're sometimes organized in interest groups, Group of 77 in China, the EU, the JUSCANs. There are many groups, interest groups within, and they all speak different languages in the sense that their priorities are different. But to be able to get them together, the UN system also has lots of entities to bring them to bear on the issues before the Sustainable Development Goals. Academics and the private sector and civil society have their own pulls and pushes. So what I think my important role, in a sense, was to bring all these people together, to bring them around a decision-making table where they could agree on something which is now called Agenda 2030, containing the Sustainable Development Goals.
Which was your key challenge securing the adoption of this agenda for all the member states?
Key challenges were many. They come on several issues. And these become problematic in every negotiation that takes place. But let me highlight some of the thematic issues which were really problematic in Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. First was on the issue of women's rights, particularly on reproductive rights, which many see as code word for abortion and the right for a woman to be able to make this decision, which often enters the debate in some big countries as pro-life and pro-choice.
Yes.
And that always is very contentious. And getting the right form of words around a woman's reproductive rights is always problematic. So we had a big struggle on that issue, and we managed to use consensus text which has come from other parts of the United Nations, other intergovernmental processes. The second is regarding the rights of the Palestinian people,
Yes.
the situation in the Middle East. It's always very problematic to get agreed language around that, but there also we managed to forge a consensus right at the last minute. Then there is the issue of sanctions, and the issue is sometimes called coercive economic measures. And it's a long-standing resolutions in the General Assembly which challenge the right of countries to impose unilateral sanctions. And that issue also always comes up. Then we have controversies about the number of goals. Some said 17 goals are too many. We need to have fewer goals. We need to have 10 maximum goals. But then we found it very difficult to reduce the number of goals, because the moment you take one goal away, some big interest group protests. For example, some said that why don't you have one goal on the environment? Why do you have a separate goal on oceans? So small island developing states, and they're a big bloc up to 39 countries, they said nothing doing. We want a separate goal on oceans. So many of these issues, desertification, land degradation, countries said no, especially countries in Africa, that we want a separate goal on desertification, land degradation. So it was very difficult to fold the goals and reach the objective of only 10 goals. And so it took from June of 2012 to September of 2015 to come to an agreement on what is now known as the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs.
So through all this process, were there any memorable moments or any anecdote that would you like to share with us, maybe while you were doing the negotiation or maybe while you were launching the agenda?
I think the first phase of this process was something called the Open Working Group. The descriptive narrative came subsequently in the General Assembly, but the Open Working Group established all these goals and most of the targets. The two co-chairs, one from the south, one from the north, had terrible tension between them. They'd reached a stage where they were not talking to each other. And my role then became to mediate between them. So the incident I can narrate today is on the last day when we were going to adopt the results of the Open Working Group. And then we decided that the two co-chairs and their teams would meet with me and my team from 2 in the morning to 6 in the morning to finalize the proposal we'll put before member states. And all the ambassadors were going to meet at 9 o'clock in the morning. So they had 3 hours. We'd promised that by 6, 7 o'clock we'd give them the draft. They would look at the draft and then come to the assembly to adopt the Open Working Group outcome. At 2 o'clock, when we met, one of the co-chairs just walked out. He's saying that this guy is not reasonable, he's not listening to me, and he just walked out of the room and he went down. We were on the 23rd floor. He went down to the ground floor and walked into the courtyard. I ran after him because I knew that, look, all the ambassadors are going to come at 9 o'clock. 7 o'clock, we promised them a draft, and this is one co-chair who just walked out of the meeting. So I ran after him. Luckily, he couldn't find his car, so he was standing in the courtyard, and I saw his driver. And I told him, please go away. Don't take him back to his home. Otherwise, this whole meeting will collapse. So the driver listened to me. And then I talked to the co-chair. I said, look, time has gone for your differences with the other co-chair to unravel in this way. And he said, okay, I'll come, provided that other co-chair doesn't speak to me. And you'll be the only person both of us will speak to. So I used to have a draft. I used to make amendments. I used to go to one co-chair, then take it to the other co-chair, get an agreement, give it to the two teams to draft the message. And we managed. And by 7 o'clock, we did send out a text to all the ambassadors and all the missions in New York. And we did convene at 10 o'clock and adopted that. So these are the little nitty-gritty negotiations which make a difference. So I thought I'd narrate this incident to show how personalities played a very important role in the adoption of the SDGs.
It's actually what a leader should do, right? To decide what to do and have that moment to say to the driver, maybe it's better you to leave. So talking about this agreement, did you ever envision that you will become the leader you are today?
I never aspired to this kind of leadership role, and I enjoyed my work. That was the most important. I did it with as much sincerity as I could muster. And you get propelled into different jobs. But I don't think pursuing leadership roles or pursuing higher levels on the hierarchy and bureaucracy are necessarily important. I think you can, whatever you do in whatever sphere of influence that you exercise, if you do your best, you find that you get propelled into different kinds of responsibilities. And that's how it's been with me. I've never really aspired to leadership roles, but willy-nilly I've got locked into these kinds of roles in the past, and I've enjoyed every stage of my career. So young people shouldn't really worry about how do I get to the next level. They should do what they are doing the best they can, and that's what will help propel them forward.
So John Nikhil Seth never thought like, I want to achieve this, or I want to be executive director of a big agency of the UN. It was something that came naturally.
Yes, and career advancement was never in my DNA. And I must say I've enjoyed every kind of thing I did in the UN. Most of my career, in fact, my New York years were around political processes, supporting governments, reaching agreements, whether it was the Millennium Summit or Rio Summit or the APIA Conference on Small Island States or the SDGs. They were all defined by my role. I naturally fit into the role because I'd been a delegate myself. And I understood the kind of compulsions which force governments to come to a consensus. How do they come to a consensus? Who are the influencers within the political processes? So that role came to me much more naturally. UNITAR is very different, but I've enjoyed my role in UNITAR too.
After all your background professionally and also personally, who has been the person who has inspired you and why?
Well, I think my mother has played the most inspirational role in my life. She was an iconic figure because she was part of India's independence struggle, and there was a very strong independence movement in 1942. It was called the Quit India movement, and she was in university then, and she was distributing pamphlets asking the colonial power, the British, to leave India, and she was arrested and thrown into jail. But in jail, she climbed the rampart, took down the Union Jack and put the Indian national flag up. And for that, she was again locked up and put into solitary confinement for a month. Now, all of you know what solitary confinement is. It's a very tortuous process where you're in a small space. Food is put under the door. You never get to talk to anyone. You never get to meet anyone. But she didn't find her spirit broken by that. And that spirit which says that never give up, keep on what you believe in, keep doing without thinking of rewards and so on, was probably the source of my inspiration in much of what I've done in my career.
It is a really beautiful story. She was an empowered woman with a powerful message.
Related to this matter, we want to ask you, because there are a lot of young people who are thinking about to developing their careers or to keep studying or looking for a job, but at some point they get desmotivated. So after read all your professional background, I was like impressed of everything that you already did. So what keep you motivated after everything to keep growing and keep going?
At the end of the day, when you come to a certain age, you realize that life has a meaning only if you look at the interests of other people. So what I'd like to tell the young people, because it's very difficult sometimes to short circuit this fundamental learning, that the satisfaction of your own life is in the achievement of others, not in the achievement, your own personal achievements. So don't worry too much about things like entitlements, things like salary, things like promotion. If you focus on the end purpose of life, which is to do good for others, that's what will give you satisfaction even now.
It's a really good response. So, just talking about the future, after everything that's happening right now, which is your perception the global world is taking?
Our world is not in a good place. There's too much conflict, there's too much death and destruction, too many young people are dying, too many women and children are dying, for no fault of theirs, because of the leadership all across, whether it's in the aggressing party or the sense of injustice. And this kind of conflict will bring us all down. Of course, linked to this conflict situation in our world is the terrible record of our generations on environmental issues, especially on climate change, and our failure to address the fundamental challenge, which is the emissions gap. The need to reduce emissions to a point where you can get to 1.5 degrees centigrade. We are nowhere near that. We are growing our emissions. We are having more and more catastrophic events. If you see images these days of plastic pollution in the oceans, it's terrible, because Busan is having its next COP on plastics, and I hope they reach an agreement there. If you look at other kinds of pollution, if you look at the pollution of the air, of the land, of water, it's disgusting, because you feel that this is the legacy we'll bequeath to future generations. And when you look at the sort of conflict and environmental destruction, you look at inequalities, you look at increasing hunger and poverty, it's not a world where we had hoped we would reach in the 21st century. We have all the science, we have all the information, we have all the knowledge, we have all the empathy, but somehow we are not getting to where we need to go. So unless drastic change comes about, firstly by silencing guns and doing what the UN does best, is to talk rather than shoot, I think that's the way we will move into a better phase. Because in a country in conflict, look at Gaza today. Does it make sense to talk about sustainable development in Gaza or environment in Gaza? Or if you look at the situation on the Ukrainian-Russian border, does it make sense to talk about pollution and environment? Till there is peace, there is no sustainable development. Concerns on equality, empowerment of women, all these other issues which the UN has championed over the decades seem nonsensical in an environment where people are more hell-bent on killing each other than on working for collective prosperity. So for the moment, it looks bleak, but I feel that things will get better. We'll have a new generation of leaders and more committed to peace. And with that will flow everything else to make our world better.
After everything that you are saying, do you think that there is a lack of great leaders in this era?
Political leadership today is very different from the political leadership I grew up with. And it's a personal question, so I'll give a personal answer. I don't want to pass judgment on political leaders all around the world, but it's clear to me that from my personal level, the inspiration from the current day and the current crop of political leaders is much less than, maybe I was younger then, but none of them inspires me in the way I used to be inspired by political leadership in the 50s and 60s. So there is a crisis in leadership, partly because of what the social media does to individuals. They put everyone under a microscope. The negatives are floated on cyberspace. So it's not a good situation because everyone is put under scrutiny. But the net result is there's no one to look up to and admire in the political leadership, in my view today. And that's a pity.
Yeah. Will you think that we are getting lost, this new generation, inside of the social media, inside of our mobile phones, and maybe that get us distracted for matters that really are important?
Yeah, we know the biases that creep in social media. If you have certain predilections and you're oriented to thinking about issues in a certain way, you get only communication and content from of like-minded views. So your prejudices are reinforced. So the open-mindedness, which is essential for being able to make a judgment on issues, that gets clouded by this prejudice that you get fed only what you believe in. That's the work of algorithms and the way this artificial intelligence perceives your interest. You only get things which you already believe in. So I think that closes the mind a bit. While you have all the information you need, and we had that Encyclopedia Britannica which weighed 50 kilograms, but now on a little iPhone, you have all the information in the world. But these biases and prejudices, those are being compounded by the way social media operates. And how do you cleanse social media of those biases? How does it pique your own intellect and imagination? I think that's the challenge going ahead on the use of many of these applications for forming people's opinions. And I think the way people's opinions are being formed today suffer from a lot of these biases.
We would like to finish this amazing interview just asking something that I will ask our guests, just to the listener, maybe they can apply on their own life, and even me. So what advice would you give to those who want to become or want to be a great leader? What has been your formula?
Well, choose your dreams and pursue them. And pursue them with integrity and sincerity and empathy. Because at the end of the day, if you love what you do, will push you into leadership positions. Don't start in the reverse. Don't start by aspiring for leadership and then doing things which you think will propel you to leadership. It's the work you do, how you do it, who you work for, how you fold in empathy and compassion for others, and as I mentioned earlier, how your concern for others comes out in your work. That's what propels you into positions of leadership.
So thank you very much, Mr. Seth, for this amazing interview. But before you to leave, we would like you to sign our banner. We are truly excited that the very first episode of Learning with Leaders features such a distinguished person as yourself.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor that I'll be the first person to sign on your banner, and the product of your work is shared as effectively as you can. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.